Guadalcanal, January 1943. A Marine corporal walks through supposedly cleared jungle. His squad has been through this area twice already. Intelligence says no Japanese soldiers remain. He's 3 steps past a small bush when the ground behind him explodes. A Japanese soldier rises from a concealed hole, shoots 2 Marines in the back, and disappears underground before anyone can react. This happened thousands of times across the Pacific. An enemy that couldn't be seen, couldn't be predicted, could strike from any direction, including straight up from beneath your feet. The Japanese spider hole wasn't just a fighting position, it was a psychological weapon that made every step through the jungle a potential death sentence. By the end of the Pacific War, these hidden positions had killed over 1,000 Marines and wounded thousands more. They turned every island into a maze of invisible death traps, and they forced the Americans to completely rethink how ground combat worked. This is the story of the spider hole, how the Japanese perfected it, how it killed, and why even today, military training includes lessons learned from the Marines who died because they couldn't see the enemy until it was too late. The spider hole wasn't invented on purpose. It evolved from necessity in the jungles of China during the Second Sino-Japanese War in the 1930s. Japanese infantry doctrine before World War II emphasized aggressive attack, banzai charges, night infiltration, bayonet assaults. The idea was to overwhelm the enemy with speed and violence. But in China, Japanese forces faced a different problem: fighting an enemy with superior numbers across massive territories. Chinese forces would retreat, then ambush. Retreat, then ambush. Japanese soldiers advancing through Chinese countryside found themselves shot at by enemies they couldn't see. Snipers in trees, riflemen behind walls. But most effectively, soldiers hiding in holes in the ground. The Chinese didn't call them spider holes. They were just practical concealment. Dig a hole, cover it with vegetation, wait for the enemy to pass, shoot them in the back. Simple, effective, and it killed a lot of Japanese soldiers. The Japanese Imperial Army studied these tactics and realized something important. In jungle or rough terrain, the soldier who can't be seen has an enormous advantage. So they adopted the tactic and refined it into a science. By 1941, when Japan entered the Pacific War, spider hole construction was part of standard infantry training. But the early Pacific battles didn't showcase the tactic much because Japanese forces were winning. They were attacking, advancing, conquering. Spider holes are defensive positions, and the Japanese were on offense. That changed after Guadalcanal. August 1942 through February 1943, Guadalcanal was Japan's first major land defeat. They'd thrown 36,000 troops at the island and lost it anyway. The lesson was clear: Japan couldn't match American firepower, air support, or logistics in direct combat. If they were going to hold islands, they needed to fight smarter, not harder. Enter the spider hole, a weapon that turned terrain into an ally. That made every square foot of jungle potentially lethal. That forced Americans to expend massive resources clearing areas they'd already cleared. The Japanese started teaching spider hole tactics to every infantry unit deploying to Pacific Islands. The construction, the camouflage, the discipline required to let enemies walk past before striking. By 1943, it had become Japan's primary defensive tactic for jungle warfare. And American Marines were about to learn just how deadly it could be. A proper Japanese spider hole wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was an engineered fighting position designed with specific purposes in mind. The standard spider hole was cylindrical, about 3 feet deep and 2 feet in diameter, just wide enough for one soldier to stand in. deep enough that when crouched, the soldier was completely below ground level. The sides were reinforced, sometimes with wooden planks scavenged from ammo crates, sometimes with coconut logs. On volcanic islands like Iwo Jima, soldiers would chip into the volcanic rock itself. The goal was to prevent collapse and create a stable firing position. The bottom often had drainage, a small sump dug into one corner where water could collect away from where the soldiers stood. Because in the tropics, it rained constantly, and standing in water for hours would leave a soldier too weak to fight effectively. This was where Japanese engineering really shined. The cover had to be removable from below, but invisible from above. Different islands required different techniques. In jungle environments, woven palm fronds or broad leaves laid over a wooden frame. The frame sat flush with the ground. From 2 feet away, it looked like natural undergrowth. The soldier inside could lift it with one hand. In grassy areas, actual turf, cut in sections with the grass still growing, laid over a bamboo lattice. The grass kept growing, making the cover blend perfectly with surrounding terrain. In volcanic or rocky areas, rock slabs covered with dirt and whatever vegetation could be found. Heavier, harder to lift quickly, but nearly impossible to spot. Some spider holes had firing ports built into the cover, small holes that allowed observation without exposing the position. But most relied on the element of surprise, complete concealment, until the moment of attack. Japanese doctrine emphasized placement over construction quality. A perfectly built spider hole in the wrong location was useless. The right locations were along trails Americans were likely to use, near water sources where troops would stop to rest, in supposedly cleared areas behind the front lines, near command posts or supply dumps, and at crossroads or choke points. The most insidious placements were in areas Americans had already fought through. Marines would clear a section of jungle, establish it as secure, move the command post forward, and suddenly Japanese soldiers were emerging from the ground in areas supposedly safe. Advanced spider holes often came in pairs, 2 holes 20 to 30 feet apart, with interlocking fields of fire. One soldier would attack, drawing American attention. While the Marines focused on that position, the second soldier would shoot them from an unexpected angle. Some elaborate systems included 3 or 4 interconnected holes with small tunnels between them. A soldier could fire from one position, drop underground, crawl to another hole, and emerge somewhere else. Marines would suppress one position only to get shot from another 50 feet away. Japanese soldiers in spider holes had to survive for days or weeks. Good positions included small storage for rations, usually just rice and water, waste management with a second smaller hole for human waste, ventilation with small air holes disguised as insect burrows, and weapon storage for rifles, grenades, sometimes explosives. The soldier was expected to remain completely still during daylight hours unless attacking. No movement, no sound, absolute discipline. Some soldiers remained in spider holes for 72 hours straight, watching American troops move past, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This wasn't just a fighting position. It was a commitment to spending days underground, in the dark, in silence, waiting to kill or be killed. And it required a level of patience and discipline that most armies couldn't expect from their soldiers. But Japanese infantry training emphasized exactly this kind of endurance. And it worked. New Georgia, July 1943. This was where American forces first encountered spider holes as a systematic defensive tactic rather than isolated incidents. The 43rd Infantry Division landed expecting moderate resistance. They got a nightmare. Japanese soldiers were everywhere and nowhere. Patrols would advance through jungle, take fire from behind, spin around to engage, and get shot from the front. by positions they'd already passed. One company lost 30 men in 3 hours without ever seeing the enemy that killed them. Soldiers were shot in the back. Grenades flew out of the ground. Bullets came from directions that made no sense. The Americans were fighting an invisible enemy. A battalion commander described the experience. "We'd clear an area, establish defensive positions, and then at night, Japanese soldiers would emerge from the ground inside our perimeter. They'd throw grenades into foxholes and disappear before we could respond. We were fighting ghosts." The psychological impact was devastating. Every bush, every patch of undergrowth, every slight depression in the ground could hide an enemy. Marines couldn't trust any terrain. They couldn't establish truly secure areas. Even their own command posts were potentially compromised. Traditional infantry tactics broke down. You couldn't just advance and hold ground, because the ground you held might still contain enemies. You couldn't protect your flanks because there were no flanks. The enemy was in every direction, including underground. Bougainville, November 1943. The 3rd Marine Division landed expecting Japanese to defend the beaches. Instead, they encountered light resistance at the landing zone, pushed inland, and walked into a spider hole network that killed 200 Marines in the first week. One Marine squad of 12 men was ambushed by a single Japanese soldier in a spider hole. He killed 4 Marines before they even knew where the shots were coming from. When they finally located and destroyed the position, they found it was connected by a small tunnel to 2 other holes. The soldier had been moving between positions, shooting from different angles, making them think they were facing a larger force. The Marine response was to advance more slowly, with scouts probing every suspicious piece of ground. But this slowed the advance to a crawl, and it still didn't work. Scouts would pass over spider holes, declare an area clear, and then troops following behind would get shot by positions the scouts had missed. Peleliu, September 1944. This was where spider hole tactics reached their peak effectiveness. The Japanese had turned the entire island into a 3-dimensional battlefield. Spider holes weren't just in the jungle. They were in the coral ridges, in the caves, hidden in the moonscape of bomb craters. The 1st Marine Division lost 1,950 men killed and 8,500 wounded, taking Peleliu. A significant percentage of those casualties came from spider holes. The official history notes that no ground could be considered secure until it had been searched multiple times. One particularly deadly incident involved a battalion command post. The Marines had cleared the area, posted guards, established defensive positions. On the second night, Japanese soldiers emerged from 4 spider holes inside the perimeter. They threw grenades into the command tent, killed 7 officers including the battalion commander, and disappeared back underground before the guards could react. Marines found the spider holes the next morning. They'd been there the whole time. The Japanese soldiers had remained motionless underground while Marines walked past, set up tents, and established the entire command post on top of them. They'd waited nearly 24 hours for the perfect moment to strike. This wasn't just combat effectiveness. This was psychological warfare. Every Marine on Peleliu knew that the ground beneath them might hide an enemy. That any moment, someone could emerge and kill them. It made sleep impossible, made rest illusory, made every quiet moment an exercise in paranoia. Because the paranoia was justified. The Marines adapted, but adaptation took time and cost lives. The first response was obvious. Probe every suspicious piece of ground. Marines used bayonets, sticks, rifle butts, anything to test the ground before stepping on it. If it sounded hollow, shoot it or throw a grenade. This worked sometimes, but spider holes were designed to avoid detection. The covers were solid enough that prodding didn't always reveal them, and probing every square foot of jungle was impossibly slow. Next tactic: scouts with mine detectors. Spider holes often contained metal, weapons, ammunition, helmets. The mine detectors would ping near concealed positions, but the jungle was full of metal debris from previous fighting. Shell fragments, discarded equipment. The detectors were overwhelmed with false positives. Flamethrowers became the primary spider hole clearing weapon. When Marines suspected a spider hole, they'd spray the area with napalm. If nothing happened, it was probably clear. If a Japanese soldier was hiding there, the results were immediate and horrific. But flamethrowers were heavy, slow, and required a soldier to get close to suspected positions. Flamethrower operators had a life expectancy measured in hours on islands like Iwo Jima. Every Japanese soldier on the island wanted to kill the flamethrower operator first because they were so effective. And flamethrowers couldn't clear every square foot of jungle. There wasn't enough fuel, wasn't enough time. Marines still had to advance through terrain that might contain hidden enemies. When spider holes were located, destruction was the only option. Grenades weren't always effective because the holes were deep and reinforced. Bangalore torpedoes, long tubes filled with explosives, were pushed into suspected positions and detonated. Satchel charges, bags of explosives, were tossed into confirmed spider holes. The blast would kill the occupant and collapse the hole, preventing it from being reused. But again, this only worked for positions that were found. The invisible spider holes continued killing Marines. War dogs were deployed starting in 1944. Trained to detect human scent, they could sometimes alert handlers to hidden Japanese soldiers. This worked reasonably well, but dogs were in short supply, and not every unit had them. And the dogs weren't perfect. The jungle overwhelmed their senses. They'd alert to dead bodies, to old positions, to recent foot traffic. They helped, but they weren't a complete solution. The blunt force approach: destroy everything. Saturate suspected areas with artillery fire, napalm from aircraft, naval gunfire. Turn the jungle into scorched earth where nothing could survive. This worked for large-scale operations, but couldn't be used everywhere. You couldn't artillery strike your own forward positions. Couldn't napalm jungle that your own troops would need to advance through. Marine doctrine evolved to never have a soldier alone. Ever. Two-man teams minimum. One Marine watches forward. One watches the ground they just passed. They advance by leapfrog. One moves while the other covers, then switch. This reduced casualties from spider holes, but didn't eliminate them. A well-placed spider hole could kill both Marines before either could react. And the buddy system slowed advancement even further. The real problem wasn't tactical, it was psychological. Marines couldn't relax, couldn't assume any position was safe. Combat fatigue, what we'd now call PTSD, skyrocketed because soldiers were in constant high alert status. Sleep deprivation became epidemic. How do you sleep knowing an enemy might be hiding in the ground beneath your foxhole? Marines would take stimulants to stay awake, crash from exhaustion, have nervous breakdowns. One Marine company on Okinawa reported that after 3 weeks of spider hole warfare, 40% of their effective losses were from combat fatigue, not wounds. Men who simply couldn't function anymore because the stress of invisible enemies had broken them mentally. The Japanese spider hole achieved something rare in warfare. It made American technological and numerical superiority almost irrelevant. You can't bomb or shoot what you can't see. And the Marines couldn't see spider holes until it was too late. February 19, 1945. 3 Marine divisions land on Iwo Jima. The island is only 8 square miles. Intelligence estimates 22,000 Japanese defenders. The Marines expect a brutal, but relatively short battle. What they got was 36 days of the most intense spider hole warfare in the entire Pacific campaign. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding Japanese forces, had studied American tactics. He knew banzai charges were suicide. He knew Japanese forces couldn't win through direct combat, so he built his entire defense around concealment, camouflage, and staying invisible. Iwo Jima's volcanic rock was perfect for this. Thousands of spider holes connected by miles of tunnels. Not isolated positions, but an interconnected network. Marines could destroy one position, and soldiers would emerge from another 100 feet away. The beaches were surprisingly quiet. Marines landed expecting a massacre. Instead, they encountered light resistance. They advanced inland, confused but grateful. Then the real battle started. Once Marines were 200 yards inland, every concealed position on the island opened fire simultaneously. Machine guns from camouflaged pillboxes, mortars from positions invisible against the volcanic rock, and spider holes, hundreds of them, with Japanese soldiers emerging to shoot Marines in the back. The casualty rate was catastrophic. Some companies lost 50% of their men in the first hour, and Marines couldn't identify where the fire was coming from. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. As Marines advanced across Iwo Jima's central plateau, they encountered spider holes in absurd density. Some areas had one spider hole every 10 square feet. Marines couldn't advance without stepping on concealed positions. The Marines developed a brutal tactic. If an area seemed suspicious, they'd saturate it with flamethrowers and explosives before advancing. This worked, but was slow and exhausted men and supplies rapidly. One battalion commander reported, "We're not fighting an army. We're fighting an island. Every rock, every depression, every shadow might kill you. We've cleared this same 100-yard section 4 times, and we keep taking casualties from it." The spider holes weren't isolated. They connected to larger cave systems where Japanese soldiers could rest, resupply, and move unseen. Marines would fight all day destroying spider holes, and overnight Japanese soldiers would dig new ones in the same areas. Flamethrower teams would burn out a position, mark it as destroyed, move on. Hours later, Marines would get shot from the same position. Not because the soldier survived, because another soldier had crawled through the tunnels and reoccupied it. This meant no ground was ever truly secured. Marines held Iwo Jima's airfields by the 4th day of fighting, but Japanese spider holes remained active in those supposedly secure areas for weeks. Aircraft mechanics and pilots would get shot at from positions inside the American perimeter. Daytime was bad. Nighttime was worse. Japanese soldiers would emerge from spider holes under cover of darkness, infiltrate Marine positions, and attack with grenades and knives. Then they'd disappear back underground before anyone could respond. Marines couldn't sleep. They'd post guards, but guards couldn't watch in every direction simultaneously. The enemy could come from any angle, including straight up from the ground. Sleep deprivation added to combat casualties. Mistakes increased. Reaction times slowed. Marines were fighting an enemy they couldn't see while exhausted, terrified, and losing faith that any position could be defended. By the time Iwo Jima was declared secure on March 26, 1945, 6,821 Marines were killed, 19,217 wounded, and nearly every unit was at less than 50% effective strength. Post-battle analysis estimated that 30 to 40% of Marine casualties were from spider holes and connected defensive positions. That's over 2,000 dead and 7,000 wounded from a tactic that required nothing but shovels, discipline, and patience. The Japanese lost 18,000 killed out of 22,000 defenders, but they'd inflicted the highest casualty ratio of any Pacific battle, and spider holes were the primary reason why. April 1st, 1945. The invasion of Okinawa, the last and largest Pacific Island battle, and the ultimate test of everything Marines had learned about spider hole warfare. The Japanese had 3 months to prepare after Iwo Jima fell. They knew the Americans were coming, and they turned Okinawa into the most elaborate spider hole network ever created. Over 100,000 Japanese troops, thousands of spider holes, extensive tunnel networks, and a new tactic: depth defense. Instead of defending the beaches, Japanese forces let the Americans land unopposed, then hit them from spider holes as they advanced inland. The Japanese defensive line centered on Shuri Castle was a masterpiece of spider hole engineering. Multiple layers of positions, each connected by tunnels, each mutually supporting. Marines couldn't advance because every position they destroyed could be reoccupied through underground routes. Fighting for the Shuri line lasted weeks. Marines would clear a position, move forward, and get shot from the position they'd just cleared. The same spider holes were contested 5, 6, 7 times because Japanese soldiers could reoccupy them from below. Casualties mounted, not from dramatic banzai charges or massive battles, but from constant attrition. 10 Marines dead here, 20 wounded there. Day after day, week after week, the spider holes bled the American forces. By Okinawa, Marines had developed better counters, more flamethrowers, better coordination between infantry and engineers, systematic clearing techniques. But the Japanese had evolved too. Spider holes with multiple exits, positions that could be abandoned and reoccupied, dummy positions that drew fire, while real positions flanked the attackers. It became an engineering battle, Americans trying to destroy every spider hole permanently, Japanese trying to build positions that couldn't be destroyed or could be replaced quickly. Okinawa lasted 82 days. Longest battle of the Pacific War. 12,000 Americans killed, 38,000 wounded, and 26,000 non-battle casualties, mostly combat fatigue. Of the combat casualties, estimates suggest 3,000 to 4,000 were from spider holes and related hidden positions. Another 1,000 Marines died in their final form. When you add up the entire Pacific War, Guadalcanal cost around 200 casualties from spider holes, New Georgia around 150, Bougainville around 100, Peleliu around 300, Iwo Jima around 2,000, Okinawa around 3,500, and dozens of smaller battles, another 500. The total approaches or exceeds 7,000 American casualties attributable to spider holes. Not all deaths, many were wounded, but the conservative estimate of 1,000 plus Marines killed directly by spider hole tactics is well supported by historical records.